Okay, so welcome everybody to this course. It's called Caring for All Beings Equally, and it's really about the practice of equanimity. And we've come to our second class this evening or this morning. So let's begin as we normally do by doing a short breathing meditation. Then we'll set our motivation and take refuge together and generate a mind of enlightenment. So please get comfortable in the seat. Have your shoulders relaxed and your back straight. And if you like, you can close your eyes or keep them open, whatever is more suitable for you. And when you're comfortable in your seat, allow the body to breathe itself. And as the body breathes itself, focus your attention on the movements and feelings that take place whenever you inhale or exhale breath. And feel the body naturally relaxing, while the mind is focused gently upon this process. And with the body at ease and the mind aware of that ease, it's very easy to imagine the presence of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas in your room, in the space above you. It's also quite easy to imagine that you're surrounded by all sentient beings. And what we have in common with all the people surrounding us is a wish to avoid even the slightest suffering and a discontent with the happiness we have. To be free from this form of discontent, we're going to rely upon the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the teachings they have imparted and their realizations. So that we might develop greater compassionate love, wisdom, and the skill to deal with ourselves and other people. So while we acknowledge the presence of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the Dharma protectors and so forth, we can take refuge in them. So please join me in taking refuge and generating a mind that seeks enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Then, in response to this request of ours, imagine that lights and nectars pour forth from the heart of the Buddha. They wash over you, and they remove every obstacle to happiness and peace, and empower you with all the good qualities of enlightenment. So you feel wonderful. You look around you and you see that all other beings are still experiencing different forms of suffering. And this is primarily because they have not developed love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So you make this wish that they do so. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is without suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from the bias of attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And in response to this wish, again, lights and nectars pour forth from the heart of the Buddha, and they wash over you and over all the beings surrounding you. This light and the nectars reveal these four immeasurable qualities to be reflections of the mind's nature, effortlessly manifesting. And in response to these four immeasurable thoughts that are now established on your own mental continuum, you say, while you're in front of the merit field, reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time, and rejoice in the meritable whole and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own and others' merits to the great enlightenment. Now, just in case there's any sort of like clinging to that merit, we're going to imagine that it transforms, along with all of our false ideas of self and other, into a wonderful pure land. And we're going to offer this to the refuge field in front of us. So reciting along with me, this ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamnaryatayami. We release this offering, and it's accepted by the Buddha, and he smiles at us with delight. And we look up into his eyes, and we see that there's a sense of joy and we feel accepted and at ease in its presence. And then an emanation of the Buddha leaves his heart, it moves through space and comes to rest above the crown of your head. The emanation descends, it enters the crown of your head and comes down through your body to rest at the level of your heart, whereby its radiance begins to expand, filling your body and mind with light. And the light goes out through the pores of your skin and begins to fill the 10 directions of space. And this light establishes every living being into the enlightened state. And you know no difference between self and other. In fact, all ideas of self and other, inner and outer, have completely vanished. You allow the mind to rest in this vast absence. And then the light begins to withdraw from the 10 directions of space, races back into your heart. You find yourself breathing normally and naturally in your seat. You feel the seat beneath you. You know that you're breathing normally and naturally. You feel embodied. And you know that this meditation took place on the level of imagination and has placed upon your mind an imprint for its actuality. So the meditation has become a cause for a future result. You rejoice in that. And then you breathe in deeply through your nostrils and exhale a little forcefully through the mouth. And allow your eyes to flutter open and to find yourself on your seat in front of your screen. And you're breathing normally and naturally and at ease. So again, welcome to this class. And being the second class, we've already covered some material. We've looked at the different types of equanimity. So in general, we looked at the what they call the feeling of equanimity, which is just a neutral state of feeling. The equanimity that prevents lethargy and excitement from arising. And then also the feeling of having an equal emotion towards others, constancy or steadiness of mind when seeing others' happiness or suffering. And finally, we looked at different ways of seeing ourselves as being the same or equal to one another. And these are some of the books I relied upon to present that teaching and also to present today's teaching. So today, so for last week, there's a lot of information we can quickly get to. by using this book here called Buddhism by the Dalai Lama and Venerable Thupten Chodron, and also Path to Enlightenment in Tibetan Buddhism. They cover the 3 different forms of equanimity. Those of feeling, or we establish in meditation, and what we call, in general, immeasurable equanimity. Today, there's quite a few meditations we'll be doing today, maybe 4 or 5, but they're very quite brief. And most of them have been taken from this book called Widening the Circle of Love. And I've also got another great one here from Geshe Thupten Lodin's book, Path to Enlightenment. Now, both of these books, Widening the Circle of Love and Path to Enlightenment, are just tremendous, because they have, like I said, this in Widening the Circle, very brief, to help us develop equanimity. And also in Path to Enlightenment is a really good meditation on developing equanimity so that we don't have, or so it can decrease our hatred and our aversion and our indifference. And in Geshe Thupten Lodin's one, these meditations are no more than, say, 3 sentences, but they're very effective. I'd also like to say this book here called A Truthful Heart by Professor Jeffrey Hopkins. It's one of the best books that I've read of his because it's so personal. It tells you a lot about him. And he has this wonderful, there's a section in it where he says, he talks about why it's quite difficult to develop equanimity. So you might also have a look at that if you have any of these books. So let's have a look at what we'll do today. I'm going to just briefly review the 4 immeasurable thoughts. And these next 3 points, so these next 2 points, overcoming attachment, anger, and apathy towards others, and developing the feeling of emotional equality towards everyone, are aspects of immeasurable equanimity. And if we're looking at the function of equanimity, it is to overcome attachment, anger, and apathy towards others. And we end up with a feeling of emotional equality towards everyone. So this is quite different from the neutral feelings of equanimity that we just experience normally. So these 4 immeasurable thoughts, as you know, the first is, may all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. The second, may all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. Thirdly, may all sentient beings never be separated or not be separated from sorrowless bliss. And finally, may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. So these 4 immeasurable thoughts are also called boundless states, the 4 boundless states, being, like I say, love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And these are widely practiced within the Pali and Sanskrit traditions, but how they're practiced is quite different. They're called immeasurable because they are directed towards immeasurable sentient beings with a mind free from partiality. They're not hindered or limited by the 5 hindrances of a desire realm mind. So I found an interesting thing last night that I told Miffy this morning, which is that...
Just stop the share while you, for a moment.
So when you have a look at this material, these 4 immeasurable thoughts, as I've put them up there, beginning with happiness and its causes, suffering and its causes, and so forth. What you're doing with those, you sort of go from immeasurable love to immeasurable compassion, then to immeasurable joy, and finally to immeasurable equanimity. And these are really highly developed mental states, which are also called jhanas, or abodes of peacefulness. And these are the way they're set up like that is that's how they're practiced within the Pali tradition. So you go from immeasurable love, then immeasurable compassion, and so forth. Now, the way it's explained in the Pali tradition, and those who are engaged in its practice, there isn't anybody that does that in the Galupa tradition. And it's not practiced like that in the Tibetan traditions. So it's studied, but it's not practiced. So I just drop that on you if you try and fit it all together. In the Galupa tradition and in the Mahayana traditions, you'll see that actually, as I'll show shortly, that equanimity will come first. And they're not trying to develop it up into these jhanic states, these states of peacefulness. What they're trying to do there is to develop the mind of enlightenment. They are the precursors to the mind of enlightenment. Impartiality or equanimity is freedom from attachment and hostility. And sides and factions are all seen as equal. The enemy and friend and neither are all treated with an even-handed kindness. Now, we should practice these four attitudes, remembering that it's all without any true existence.
So, Eddie, just tying into what you just said about how it's practiced in the Pali tradition or the Sanskrit tradition. So both do immeasurable equanimity, but the difference, what is the focus? One is of like this, of being emotionally free oneself, and then the Sanskrit tradition takes it a step further. Is that?
Yeah, you could say that. That's fine. Yeah. So yeah, of course, in the Pali tradition, the goal is one's personal liberation. In the Mahayana, of course, it's to develop a mind of enlightenment and then become a fully awakened being called a Buddha, so you can help others. So these here, in terms of the Mahayana tradition, they're like I said, they're the precursors to the mind of enlightenment.
And in the Pali tradition,
like precursors to liberation.
Right. And is that why the order is different?
Yeah, this is quite different. Yeah. Yes. So yeah. So here we can see what we're trying to do here is to overcome attraction to some people, repulsion or aversion to others, and indifference towards yet others. So others doesn't mean just people. It would mean every animal, every being in the lower realms, even the beings in the God realms. So this sense of evenness is like the first step in the cultivation of the spirit of awakening or mind of enlightenment. Again, so we have different types of impartiality or different types of equanimity we can develop. So in the Mahayana, we have this, a way of describing it as the three scopes or the three capacities for practice of individuals. So when we begin and we're practicing on the lower scope, and our goal here is to not fall into the lower realms, but to take rebirth in the higher realms. So one of the ways of doing that, we start off with this wish that all beings will overcome their afflictions towards one another. And, of course, we're wishing this for ourselves, but for everyone else too. And as we make progress into the middling stages of practice, we actually, we have to overcome our own attachment and anger towards others. So this is, the people in the Pali tradition are doing exactly that, overcoming their own attachment and anger towards others. Just the way they're going to do this is going to be quite a little different than they do in the Mahayana tradition. And in terms of the great scope, we're actually going to overcome favoritism when directing love and compassion towards others. And the way that that is done, or it's shown how to be done, is in the practices called equalizing and exchanging self for others.
So every now and again when you present this, Eddie, I get it, and then it all turns to mush in my mind. So the middle scope one is really evening others out, and then the great scope one is evening out others and myself. Is that?
Well, let's just wait a bit. So let's just stick with what we're going today. What we're really looking at here is we want to have a feeling. The feeling that we're going to have is that our emotions are equal regarding others. Right, so that's this middle scope. And when we come to the great scope, the feeling is there's no difference between ourselves and others.
Oh, okay.
That's the difference. A feeling of no difference in the great scope. And a feeling of sort of equality. Our emotions is the same towards everybody else. We don't have that sort of up and down emotional states. The Lama Tsongkhapa Lamrim Chinmo, he says that from the outset, establish an even-minded attitude, eliminating the bias which comes from attachment to some living beings and hostility to others. Otherwise, any love or compassion you feel will be biased. You'll never feel unbiased, affectionate love or compassion. So cultivate impartiality. So I think you can sort of see in some way here that without this impartiality as a basis to develop unbiased love or unbiased compassion, we won't be able to actually develop a mind of enlightenment. So this equanimity is really important. In fact, I was reading just recently a book by D. Alan Wallace, and he was saying that when he first went up to Dharamsala, his teacher, Geshe Nawang Dage, gave him 2 meditations that he had to do for about 4 months, and just did those 2 meditations. And it was on this equanimity and on fortunate human rebirth. So in this meditation, these meditations we're going to be doing, so the meditation is really on the finding out these, acknowledging that we distinguish between friend, enemies, and strangers.
Because Eddie, also with this quote, I mean, let alone trying to develop bodhicitta or the mind of enlightenment, if we've got this kind of bias, even our ordinary love and compassion is going to backfire on us.
Yeah, well, that's right, as it does all the time right now.
Because that's just, what we do. We just look after our own and hang the rest. That's the kind of society's attitude, and it doesn't work in the long term.
No, and even with, like you say, with those close to us. Right, so when our attachment that we have towards others, and the expectations that come along with that attachment are not met, then the mind just goes to anger and hatred. So even with those close to us, there's this fluctuating mind. So we can start off being friends because we're all part of one family, but then because we have these biased attitudes, you end up not liking your parents or some of your other siblings, right?
Also, recently in the news, there was a story of a mother who'd just given birth in hospital, and she's spent a couple of days there nursing her newborn baby, and then the hospital realised they'd got the two babies mixed up.
Yeah.
And so in the news report, the mother said when she found out, she felt such revulsion to the baby because it was the wrong baby.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah, well, there you go. There's a great example of the biased affection. Yeah, it's not mine.
Not mine. And then
Mine.
this horror of it, which
Yeah.
to me is horrific to hear.
Okay, so let's have a look at this next slide. So here I've just tried to, really, I wanted to use this feeling aspect, because later on there's going to be, like I said, when we go to equalize the exchanging self for others, the equalizing practice there, it's the feeling of no difference between ourselves and others. Like we are the same, in other words, we are the same. But here, what we're really doing here is like, trying to get a mind that is non-biased. It's not being affected by aversion and attraction. So this type of immeasurable impartiality, the feeling of equal emotion regarding others, also it's like a constancy or steadiness of mind when seeing others' happiness or suffering. So whenever we see others' happiness or suffering, our mind just remains steady. And this form of equanimity balances what's called social reactivity. So, this social reactivity is a great term, I think, for the example you just gave, Miffy, right? Of, oh, it's not my baby, suddenly revulsion. Now, equanimity is not easy to develop. In fact, it can take, as Alan Wallace was given, like 4 months to do it. And sometimes, in class, we've asked our own Tibetan teacher, some students have been brave enough to ask, oh, Geshe, do you have equanimity? And they often laugh and go, wow, like he's been studying all these years, and he was not saying, yep. So it can take quite some time. Now, and I think some of the reasons for that is because of what opposes it. So equanimity is what's called near and far enemies. And these are the things that oppose a development of equanimity. We have the near enemy and the far enemy. And the near enemy is what's sort of hard to recognize. So in brief, it's basically indifference or just not caring. Right? It's also called like a sense of apathy based on what we call worldly life, ordinary life. And in it, you don't notice or you do not pay attention to the faults or qualities of others. Now, so I said before, like when I was growing up, so I grew up in the 60s. I was a teenager in the 60s. And, so between the late 60s and the 70s was this idea of being cool, like being a cool guy. What does it mean to be cool? So I thought that you just don't care. Like everything's so easy, you don't really care about it. And what I was actually doing was developing this indifference and apathy. And I made effort not to notice the faults or qualities of others. like I was way off base. Right? Of course, it was many years ago, I didn't even know about Buddhism existed. But that's what I was trying to do, to not notice the faults or qualities of others. And you do sort of end up like not caring. Well, that's what happened with me anyway. You just don't sort of care.
Yeah, so I relate to that, Eddie, because of the just trying to flatline your
Yeah,
heart so that you don't feel anything. But the actual feeling quality of it is very bland and very isolated.
yeah, that's right. And that's what I found, that years later, I'm sort of working on, I'm doing something really wrong here, because I don't feel anything towards people anymore. And I was quite worried. I thought, this is what I've read. This is what these psychopaths feel. They don't care at all about people. So that's when I realized I'm doing something wrong here. I'm going to stop doing this and work something else out. Now, the far enemy is easy to recognize. It's basically this: when you are angry and you have malicious thoughts towards others, when jealousy arises, and partiality and prejudice. Other things that can arise would be cruelty, revulsion, so it's even a sense of real pride where you're quite different than the other. So these states are, they're quite easy to recognize, and you'll know there you're not impartial. You've been quite affected by these mental states. Now, if we want to put an end to these far enemies, we sort of have to know how they exist and how they function. So what I'm saying is, like, even before we sort of develop equanimity, we've got to sort of know. So let's say, so we've got equanimity. That's our side, right? So that's like our army. That's our army, our forces we want to develop. And on the other side, we've got these forces of anger, jealousy, prejudice, all these things. So as anyone who's ever studied a little bit of history, or especially the history of war, you have to know the makeup of the enemy. Otherwise, you won't be able to defeat them. And then once so you need two things. You need to know about how the enemy is made up, constructed, and then you have to have a force of your own that will actually overcome them. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is we need to find out, like, what are these forces of anger and malice and aversion and so forth. And on the other side, there's desirous attachment, lust and so forth. So we need to find out about them. So I'm just going to briefly say something about that side of things, and then come back to looking at equanimity. So I'm sort of, in a way, often shocked, like how big the Buddha Dharma is. You go, oh, I've just got to learn about equanimity, and then you find out, no. You actually have to find out what equanimity opposes. And you've got to sort of go into them and go, oh, okay, so this is how my antidote will actually will beat them. So, in brief, so this little fellow here with a stub in his mouth, that's Linus, isn't it? Is that right? And remember, Linus always loved that blanket. So attachment is a deluded mental factor that observes its contaminated object and regards it as a cause of happiness and wishes to possess it. So with attachment, we've actually got an object that we like. And but what it does, it actually pollutes the affection that we have towards that object. And it pollutes it with neediness and possessiveness. And it clings to the object with unrealistic expectations. I mean, there's so much we could say about attachment. And what I will say is that it has different meanings within different contexts. Once again, this word like attachment, anger, there's so many words used in Buddhism where the meaning changes dependent upon the context.
And Eddie, how you've described the neediness, that our affection to the object is polluted by neediness, that really brings out the anxiety that's within attachment, how it's actually not a pleasant thing at all. There's yeah, it's not a happy feeling.
And on the other side, we have the anger. So here it's, again, it's defined as a deluded mental factor that observes its contaminated object, exaggerates its negative characteristics, considers it to be undesirable, and then wishes to harm it. Now, both attachment and anger are based on a distorted attention that exaggerates or projects either these really good qualities or the defects onto people and things. Of course, these mental states of anger and attachment are supported by many stories that we have, many ideas. And if you sort of examine those stories, you'll find they're false. They don't add up. But nevertheless, they produce this anger and this attachment. So this exaggerates. So this process of exaggeration on the side of anger and on the side of attachment. So both sides is an exaggeration going on.
And once the exaggeration happens, it really takes hold, because when it's happening, then you believe that story 100%.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So some of them use the term grasping attachment or clinging, and sometimes they use but even this term grasping or the clinging is really like, in a way, it's associated with the idea that we believe something. So Jeffrey has his hand up. Jeffrey, what would you like to ask?
And Eddie, just stop the share.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Murphy.
In this, I was looking at that. Okay. So in this one, there's a statement that's slightly throwing me off, that I'm not understanding the precise meaning of it. It says, in defining attachment, a diluted mental factor that observes its contaminated object. And then the same thing in defining anger, that observes its contaminated object. I'm wondering what that contaminated aspect is referring to.
Yeah, excellent. Good. Yeah, we should all wonder that, I mean, these terms. So what's contaminating the object is sort of two things, Jeffrey. The major one being ignorance. Right, so it's so there's the ignorance, and then there are the causes and conditions that produce the object.
So it's contaminated by the observer.
Yeah, basically that's right.
Thank you. Okay, mahalo.
That's right. Yeah. That's a nice way of putting it, Jeffrey. It's contaminated by the observer. That's right. The mind itself, that's associated with the object. Yeah. But then if we look at from the side of the object, like us as persons, right? So we are basically here within and undergoing our own process of cyclic existence due to ignorance and karma. So even the objects themselves, like I said, are contaminated.
But it's a very nice definition then, because like you said in a previous class, that when the Buddhas look at sentient beings, they don't see any faults. So from the eye of of wisdom, it's not contaminated. The objects aren't contaminated.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, are there any other questions anybody else would like to ask? Are you sort of okay where we're at so far? Okay. So basically, we need to sort of find out and become familiar with the forces or the disturbing emotions that we wish to apply equanimity against. So we have to have, we need to have our own side of equanimity, and then we need to know what we're facing and how these phenomena exist. So which brings me now to the equanimity prayer that many of us will be familiar with. And this is the one that is put at the very beginning of the four immeasurables. So here it says, how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were to abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May they abide in this way. I shall cause them to abide in this way. Please, Guru Buddha, inspire me to be able to do this. So this is one of the four immeasurables, and it's the first one in terms of how it's set up within the Mahayana tradition. It's the basis to develop an immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, and immeasurable joy. And the prayer is actually an encouragement for us to develop a mind that is free from the bias of aversion and attachment. And you can see it's got these four parts. And when we recite the four parts, the purpose of it is to gradually intensify the emotion that we have so that we really want to do this. So the first line is a wish, how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings would abide in equanimity. And the next one is this aspiration. So aspirations and wishes are basically the same. When we say, may they abide in this way, we include ourselves in that. Then I shall cause them to abide in this way. This is the resolution we make to ourselves. Now, if you think about it, you think, well, the only way you can do that is to be able to become a fully awakened being yourself. And so I said, okay, so I need help. So please, Guru Buddha, bodhisattvas, deities, Dharma protectors, like whoever's enlightened, whoever's on the way to enlightenment, please help me to develop this immeasurable equanimity. So here is holiness from Buddhism. One teacher, many traditions, says equanimity refers to both equanimity towards others in the meditator's mind and equanimity in the minds of all sentient beings. So like I said, simply saying this out, may I have equanimity and may everybody else have equanimity too. We wish all sentient beings to experience equanimity so that their minds will be free from gross attachment and anger, and that everybody receive the equal benefit of that.
Eddie, also I love this extended version of it, because the beginning and the end one, like the beginning one of we can't do it unless we can actually imagine it and go, wow, wouldn't it be incredible if? So we have to actually imagine it and have the courage to do it. And then at the end, it gives us the courage, because it's not just us by ourselves, we're asking for help. But like if we can't even, it's just like with enlightenment, if you can't imagine that it's possible, if you don't have the courage to imagine it, you can't do it.
Yeah. And so the lovely thing also about this imagining is all we're really doing is sort of take the imagination is based on reality. But it's just a reality we haven't experienced yet. So if anyone, if you want to, it would be rather pointless, wouldn't it, to wish to become enlightened if it weren't possible. If we could just imagine being enlightened, but actually it's impossible to be enlightened. But that's not the case. And it's also not the case that a person could not have equanimity towards all beings. So these are things that actually exist, but not at present for us. However, it's a good thing to imagine them at present for us. Actually, in fact, nearly all the deity meditations are done on that idea, aren't they? We're not actually a deity, but we can imagine ourselves to be one, and we know it's quite possible because of emptiness and great compassion. Let's have a look. So, what are some of the ideas that we can use, or not just ideas, but the way things are? What do we need to recollect about reality so that we can actually engage in these practices? So one of the things about our reality as being unenlightened beings is uncertainty. So how does recollecting uncertainty help us with equanimity? Well, it's this. The categorization of people as friends, enemies, and strangers is unstable. And it's highly subjective. So in one way it's saying, like, it's not certain that friends will remain friends. It's not certain that enemies will remain enemies, and it's not certain that strangers remain strangers. So these categories are unstable. And again, highly subjective. So again, when I look back at my life as a much younger person, I really was trying to find stable friends, friends who would always be my friends. And when they were my enemies, they were always my enemies. So there's no tolerance for my enemies, but sort of like great faith that my friends would remain friends. And of course, sometimes they didn't. So then that was highly, highly disappointing to me. And I just didn't know this was the case. I just thought, when people were friends to you, that they were actually friends, so they're going to remain as such. So this is one way to come at equanimity. The first, to reflect that our categorization of people as friends, enemies, and strangers is unstable, highly subjective. There is nothing fixed in these relationships. In fact, if you look over your own life, you'll see that your friends have now turned, some of your friends are now strangers. And before a friend became a friend, they were a stranger to you. And it's the same with enemies. So there's nothing fixed in any of the relationships. Thus, there's no reason to be partial for or against any sentient being. So here His Holiness says, think of the many changes we have experienced in this lifetime alone. Then think of the past and the future, and how the roles of friend, enemy, and stranger are not stable, but subject to change. So it's not reasonable to cling to the factors of hostility, attachment, and indifference that we have towards our friends, enemies, and strangers, as if they were unchangeable when they're not. So in other words, we're sort of saying, we have these friends, then we have attachment towards them. Enemies, we have hostility towards them. And strangers, we have indifference towards them. So it's not so much the problems with the categories, it's the thinking that they're going to be stable. And then having these three mental states involved with friends, enemies, and strangers. This is the big problem. Our indifference and our aversion and our attachment. So let's just do a quick meditation, and this is from a book called Becoming Enlightened by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It's just called I've just called it the No Certainty Meditation. Right? So these are all, remember, they're processes of thought that we go through. They're what they call analytical meditations. And when we come to the point of it, the realization, we stop analyzing, we just rest the mind on what we've now discovered. So let's give this a go. So first of all, imagine that you have a friend, an enemy, and a neutral person in front of you. Now focus upon your friend and ask yourself, does my friend appear to be completely attractive? Does they've helped me or my friends in this life? Then does the neutral person appear to be not attractive, but they're not unattractive either? And why is that? Well, they haven't harmed us and they haven't helped us. Then look across at the enemy and ask yourself, does this person appear to be completely unattractive, having harmed me or my friends in this life? Then consider that within this present lifetime and over the course of many lifetimes, there is no certainty at all that an enemy will remain an enemy, a friend will remain a friend, or that a neutral person will remain neutral. As this is so, it's not right to single out just one group to be close to, another group to be alienated, and another to be indifferent towards. In fact, all of these people equally want happiness and not suffering, just like you. So in terms of, that brings this brief meditation to an end. This is what I quite like about them. They're only 3 or 4 sentences long, but you can quickly get to the point. You go, oh my gosh, that's right. So if we consider many lives, past and future lives, well, under this topic called rebirth, then Nagarjuna says, one's father becomes one's son, and one's mother, one's wife. And the person who was an enemy becomes a beloved friend. As there's no certainty in cyclic existence.
Eddie, before we get any further, Jeffrey has
a question.
Okay,
good. Let's see, Jeffrey.
It's in chat. It says, to the enlightened mind, there are no unenlightened minds. Is this true?
The enlightened mind, there are no unenlightened minds. No, I don't think so. I've come across, so the Buddha can sort of see who is enlightened and who is not enlightened.
Eddie, I think this was in relation to whether a Buddha sees any flaws in sentient beings.
Not in the sentient being, not as the sentient being. What he sees is the mental flaws.
So a Buddha sees
Excuse ignorance, the people that have ignorance, anger, aversion, all the mental things.
But he doesn't see, he sees the flaws in people, but he doesn't see flawed people.
That's right.
Right.
The person is not flawed.
I believe so, but the unenlightened mind doesn't recognize their own enlightenment. We all have a Buddha nature.
Yes, we all have Buddha nature, but Buddha nature is not Buddhahood. Buddha nature is the potential to become Buddha. So often, when I hear this one, I go, so the potential to be pregnant doesn't mean you're pregnant, right? So we have Buddha nature, but we're not Buddha. You know? Up, yes, Jeff. Yep.
My mind is wanting to stretch this out a little bit and say, would it not be accurate to say that the awakened Buddha nature is our ever-present reality, though due to the obstructions of the personality, we have not yet entirely integrated and awakened to this ever-present reality?
Yeah, that'd be fine with me.
All right.
I mean, it's a great way of looking at it, isn't it? It gives us a lot of confidence. Yeah, and when you really look at the nature of mind, you won't actually see the afflictions aren't inherent to the mind. Yeah, they often give the example, Jeff, of having like a mirror, which always has the capacity to reflect. Right? But sometimes like dust gets on the mirror and then the capacity to reflect is hindered. And the dust can be just wiped off the mirror. The dust is not an integral part of the mirror surface. And this is the same with us, we have this mind, which is a marvelous capacity, but it's hindered at present. And yet the hindrances can be removed, just like dust can be removed from the surface of a mirror.
And not only is our mind hindered, but we think we are the hindrances. We think because all we can see is the dust, that we are the dust. We can't even see underneath it.
No, so we have lots of the wrong ideas, but like I said again, the wrong ideas aren't inherent to the mind. Like I said, wrong ideas can be removed through correct ideas. So the state of freedom is always there. It's possible to be free, moment to moment to moment. It's always there. But as you all know, it's we don't often experience that freedom directly. Okay. So here we have this uncertainty, but it also shows constant change. So that leads us to our next meditation. So this one comes from Geshe Loden, from his book Meditations on the Path to Enlightenment. And when I read it, just this part where I'll put up on screen had a big effect on me. And we'll do the whole meditation, but this line I think is just tremendous. During limitless lifetimes, my relationships with other living beings has constantly changed. Now that's just the fact, isn't it? And I went even back further and I went, look, your mind, it's not permanent, it's changeable. Your body, it's not permanent, it's changeable. So the body and mind, which is the basis for person, is in change, in motion. And that's the case not with just ourselves, but with every living being. They're all impermanent, they're all subject to change. So if our body and mind is constantly changing, aren't we changing? If the basis is changing and we're imputed to the basis, we're changing. Of course. So this is like a little light bulb moment for me, you know. Of course, there's nothing stable here. Of course, my relationship with others must change. I mean, our relationship with ourselves is changing all the time, isn't it? Of course, it'll change with others too. So this sentence was like a sort of a, it just put a little gap in there for the clinging, you know, to think, oh, you want things to stay the same. In fact, but they really can't. So again, let's just do this brief meditation. And it's only got a few sentences, so I'll lead you through. So the first point to remember is this. During limitless lifetimes, my relationships with other living beings has constantly changed. It's true that the people I've grouped as enemies, with whom I feel angry towards and cannot communicate very well with, might be harming and hindering me at present. But in many previous lives, they have loved me and helped me, and I have loved and helped them too. Furthermore, in past lives, they have all been kin to me and nurtured me with great kindness. And so there's no need to harbor anger or to hurt them. And that's the end of that meditation. Again, just 4 sentences. So this one was about anger. He also does one in there to stop attachment and another one for indifference. And they're just like 3 sentences. But if you like read them and just sort of sit with it, like it's like, whoa, okay, you know, it's correct. Now, there's ideas of having aversion and attachment and indifference towards others. This is wrong. Okay, next one. So the objects of our impartiality. So the sequence that I'm going to put down, so it's not carved in stone, right? It's highly dependent. It's just, this is the way that Lama Tsongkhapa puts it in the Lamrim Chenmo, but there are other ways other lamas will put it depending upon other texts. Now, Jeffrey, you had your hand raised. You have another question? Yep.
Yes, Eddie, can we get away with saying that there is only one here? In reality, there is only one here.
I'm not sure what so the one you mean?
Well, I'm looking to simplify all of the teachings. Can we just say that there is only one here? There's only the illusion of another?
There's only the illusion. I tell you what, Jeffrey. There's a great, terrific poem in the Zen tradition. It's called On Trust in the Heart, it's called. And his last line, I think he says, all we can say is not to.
That's also possibly alternatively titled Verses on the Faith Mind by Seng San. Is it that
That's
one?
the one. That's right.
Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah, yeah. So I love that poem. He says, all we can say is not to. Right? He's not saying one, he's saying not two.
Interesting.
So that resonates with me. So here we have these objects of impartiality. So we begin with, someone who's neither helped or harmed us, often called the neutral person or the stranger. Now, it's often recommended that this is the person we should start with. The thing is there is because the mind is sort of neutral, but it could also be indifferent. So if it's indifferent, then we go, now that's the near enemy. It's like I'm just not caring about him. So if you're not caring, that's not it. Right? That's just indifference. We're just getting someone who hasn't helped or harmed us. Then we move to the friend. And then finally we go to the enemy or the difficult person. And then we have like all living beings. The thing about this, the first one, the stranger, we do this because the mind has no sort of reactivity. You know, there's no obvious mental fluctuations like there are when we talk about friends or enemies. So often what you'll find is when you sit down and do the meditation, you'll notice how the fluctuation of the mind. You'll start off with, okay, it's like that towards the stranger, but then if I move towards the friend, there's a difference, a feeling tone, difference. You'll actually notice it. And if it's not, you put up an enemy, you'll certainly notice it, right? You're, whoa. Of course, when you put the friend up, it's also noticeable because of the attachment you have towards friends. So that will show itself to you as a felt experience. So, and this is another thing, His Holiness says, again, from the book called Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions. He says, having equal, open-hearted care for others does not mean we treat or trust everyone equally. Conventional roles and relationships still exist. We trust old friends more than strangers, even though we want both equally to be happy and free from suffering. So while maintaining equanimity internally, we can still prevent someone from hurting us. Okay, we've got a couple of more meditations to go, so let's have a look at these. And this is sort of follows on from what I was just saying about noticing the emotional tones, the feeling tones that take place within you when you place up friend, enemy, stranger and start applying your analysis towards them. So again, this is from the book Widening the Circle of Love by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He says, begin by noting that within our minds we have three main categories for people: friends, neutral beings, and enemies. We may have many attitudes towards them, but three are our concern here. Lust for those we hold close, friends, those we have attachment towards; indifference arising from neglect; and then hatred. When one of these three attitudes is present, it's impossible to generate a feeling of closeness with everyone. So lust, hatred, and indifference must be neutralized. So he says, right, simultaneously imagine a friend, an enemy, and a neutral person. Then examine your feelings to see who is being held closely and who is kept at a distance. You feel naturally close to your friend. Towards your enemy, you feel not only distant, but sometimes also anger, irritation, or fear. And you feel nothing for the neutral person. Investigate why. Well, the friend appears close because she has helped you or your friends. The enemy appears distant because they have harmed you or your friends. And you feel indifferent towards the neutral person because they have neither helped nor harmed you or your friends. Realize that, like yourself, all these people want happiness and do not want pain. And in this important way, they are equal to you and to one another. Remain with this realization until it sinks into the depths of your mind. So I remember many years ago, before I came to the Buddhist path, I had a friend betray me, and I was, it made me think, what is a friend? What is a friend? And I couldn't answer it. And then many years later, coming along to the Buddhist path, this thing of like, we call people friends for this really simple reason: is we like them. It's not deep philosophical thing. It's really not deep at all, right?
It's really fickle, actually. It's
We like them
embarrassingly
because
fickle.
they do things that we like. If they're kind to our friends, we like that and we like them. If they do good things to us, we like them and we call them friends. And when they do the opposite, we call them enemies and we don't like them. It's not very deep, not very profound, is it? Yeah. I guess your Absence says, among all these migrating beings, which should I hate and which should I be attached to? Let me now not discriminate liked and hated, but have an equal mind towards them all as my friends. So you can see here, I like this, that's why I put this one, as my friends, because all we're going to do here is get this sense of equality so we can build on it. And have all beings, we're going to approach all beings as friends, precious. So I think that's important to remember. The equanimity is just like the ground. On that ground, we're going to build the building of enlightenment, the mandala of enlightenment. This is the support. Alicia, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, sometimes you have high profile people and you feel negative feelings towards them because you perceive that they are doing harm to others or to the world.
Yep.
And so I think just from the study I've done previously that the approach there is to recognize that just like you, they also want happiness and don't want suffering, and that the way that they are kind of trying to achieve that is causing harm to themselves and others, and that's the basis for equanimity and compassion. Would that be right?
I think it's sort of right, Alicia. So what we've got to remember is, we can, it's like that other meditation back there with by Geshe Loden. So I like that. It's like, no, these people are doing harm.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're not discounting that. They are. But we've also got to remember they've also done good. And in fact, they've done more good than the harm they're presently doing. So that's the thing that we often forget.
In past lives?
Like in past lives, and might even be in this life. So
Okay.
as we know, many times and we find great stories of people who've done great harm in this life, in the early stages of their life. And in the latter stages, they're completely different people. They do all good.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's another aspect to this too, that I'm just perceiving they're doing harm because it's harm to my friends. But to their friends, they're not doing any harm at all.
Yeah.
So
this brings in the subjective aspect, doesn't it?
yeah. And so there's the subjective aspect of how fickle am I to think that my friends matter more than, their friends. But also it's becoming apparent to me today how that when you're talking about uncertainty, that it's as if, we had a really close, wonderful, loved family member or even a pet, and then they got really sick and started being all growly and biting everybody, and you don't suddenly go, oh, I hate you. You actually still care for them, but you just don't get bitten. And it's like in this life, the enemies are like that. They're just temporarily insane and horrible, but actually they, in the past, were our closest friends. So how can we hate them?
Yep. So let's go to the next
I always try to
meditation.
remember, who am I to judge that person? That's
Well, we do make the judgments. The fact is we do judge, don't we? But then it's like, look at consequences of our judgment. You could say, and go, and you go, oh, this is not working so well. So is there some other way I can judge? Some other judgment I could make that's also true? And you could say, yeah, you can. You'll know that whatever goes on in this person's life, that person doesn't want to experience even the slightest form of suffering, and they're not content with the happiness they have.
But should we be judging actions, or are we judging people?
No, I think it's the actions. It's the actions of people. Yeah.
Kate says we judge with our own limited minds.
Yeah, that's right. And we are. We've just got to acknowledge that, and that's exactly right. Yeah.
But I like what you said, Eddie, find a different way to make a judgment. So one that's kind of more based on reality.
Yeah, so here they're making the suggestion that the judgment we make, the way we see these people is that these people wish to be happy and they don't want to be unhappy, and yet they're not happy and they're actually unhappy, and then whatever they do to become happy sort of works against them, because we're unenlightened. So here, again, as Holly is saying, if you're open to the possibility of past and future lives over a continuum of lives, consider the implications of rebirth. And you can start off by looking just at this life, just itself, and then take what happens in this life and then move it over to other lives. So like you say, in this life, it's never certain that friends will remain friends, enemies will remain enemies, and strangers will remain strangers. Right? So even in this life, that is not certain. So you go, well, it's not going to be the same in any other life, is it? Yeah, well, no. So he says, consider that even within the span of this lifetime, there's no certainty that specific individuals will always be friends, enemies, or neutral. Now, consider examples from your own life. A neutral person who became a friend. So, straight there, isn't it? It's like, you know what? Before Sue and I became friends, we were strangers. I didn't know it. So she was a stranger first, and now we're friends. That's every friend you have, you go, well, before they were friends, I didn't know them. They were strangers to me. And it's the same sort of thing with enemies. Sometimes we don't get the steps of stranger, friend, enemy. We go stranger, enemy. All they have to do is do something that we find unpleasant to us, or someone that we care about, or some cause that we care about. And now we've just changed from becoming this indifference to the stranger to anger towards a person we're labeling enemy.
Oh yeah, I was just looking at photos from my primary school and the people that have all grown up now, and I recognized the name of my best friend in primary school, and she's grown up, and I can't remember anything about her. And I'm thinking, my God, all I know by looking at the name, she was my best friend for 2 years, and I can't remember why. I can't remember what we had in common. Nothing. It's like disappeared. I just somehow I thought our friends are always friends, but clearly no.
No, that's true. And if you could recollect some of the reasons, like if you met her at when you have these school gatherings together and you come together and meet all your old school friends, and if they said something really nice that you've done towards them and what they really liked you as a friend, suddenly you think, we're friends again. It's that fickle, right? Yeah. So we can have a neutral person become a friend, a neutral person becomes an enemy, a friend who becomes neutral or an enemy who becomes a friend. So during the Second World War, so Russia was seen as the enemy of the West, joined up with Germany, and then when Germany betrayed its friendship with Russia and became an enemy. Then Russia became the friend of the Allies. So, that's how it is. So if you can do that, like in just one life, you can do it out to past lives, and if you go, it'll be the same in future. He goes on to see that in the longer perspective of many lifetimes, friend, enemy, and the neutral person have all equally helped and harmed you or your friends. So it cannot be concluded that they are solely one way or the other. Realize that in the terms of the long course of beginningless rebirth, none of us can decide that someone who has helped or harmed us in this life has been doing so for all lifetimes. So it's not right to single out one for intimacy, another to be indifferent towards, and another for alienation. This is another very brief meditation. So if you imagine two people, right? You're in front, you've got two people, one on one side of you, another on the other side of you. Imagine that one of them is yelling at you while brandishing their fists like this at you. So then you're going to feel uncomfortable, aren't you? You ask them, why am I feeling uncomfortable here? Why am I feeling afraid, a bit fearful? So, well, I seem to be in imminent danger of being struck by this person. You're yelling at me and they've got their fist raised. That's why I feel uncomfortable. But then at the very same time, imagine this a person on the other side of you praising you and stroking your arm. Examine why you are so pleased with this. It's just due to a temporary circumstance. You're paying attention to this. It's just that kindness there. So he says, understanding this, consider that your reactions concerning friends and enemies is not very profound. It's not, as I was saying, when you sort of ask yourself, what do I mean by a friend? You just like them. Why do you like them? Because they just do things you like. And the enemy is the same thing. Why don't I like them? Well, they've hurt me or someone I know. That's it. And then we just cling to it, make it really real. But now this person should be avoided, this one should be harmed. Right? But it's temporary. Just things come together. Yeah. And concluding meditation.
Eddie, I'm just thinking, this is why I can never grasp world politics, because the friends and the enemies, Iraq and Iran, first enemies, then friends, then whatever, and I just can't keep up, and I cannot figure it out. And by the time I have, it's flipped over to the other anyway. So this explains a lot.
Well, actually, Iraq, Iran are two good countries to apply this to, because they've shifted from friends, enemies, and they're neutral. They've gone through all three stages in our lifetime. So the last meditation is this one. He says, from their own point of view, friends, enemies, and neutral persons equally want happiness and do not want suffering. So I do this thing in class now because I just ask everybody in the class, so who here wants to suffer? And no one puts their hand up. You go, right, there's people who've just come in, they're strangers, there's people who've been here for a little while. There's nobody here I don't like, but basically everyone is saying, I don't want to suffer. Right? Yeah. Anyone want to be happy or happier? Everyone goes hands up. So it's true. From their side, this is how it is. Then ask yourself, from your own point of view, each one of these persons has been your friend limitless times over beginningless cyclic existence. And not only were they friends then, but they'll be friends again in the future. Now, each has also been our enemy just as often. And each of them has been equally neutral. Thus, from whatever side it is considered, your own or others, there's no point in exaggerated ideas of intimacy and alienation. You should not value one person as basically good and another as basically bad, even though their present actions may be good or bad, helpful or harmful. And so there's no reason to be nice to one person and not nice to another. As though it is true that persons temporarily are friends or enemies, helpful or harmful, it's incorrect to single anyone out for attraction or hatred. Again, this was from Widening the Circle of Love, and it's on page 37. But that book is made up of all these brief meditations like that, and it's just focused around trying to develop this great love. So to have this impartial, immeasurable love to others, we need the support of equanimity. So this book I found is a very good one. It's very small, you can just carry it in your pocket. Yeah. Anyway, we've come to the end of our class for today. That really raced by to me.
Don't worry, we're over.
Oh, okay. Any final questions? Anything anybody would like to ask before we have a look at what we've got for next week and dedicate the material? Jeffrey, yep.
Let's see if I can get away with it. You kind of threw me when you said that not two is not the equivalent of one. To me, it seems like they're saying the same thing, but you're seeing something differently.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they're equivalents. I'm just saying when we say not two, don't hop and quickly think that it's one. Not two is not one.
Okay, I always carried that as the implication. The implication was they're not two, they're one. But okay.
No, that's if they were, that was the case. They just say it straight, Jeff. It's all one. But he's not saying that. If you grasp to one, now you got the problem. One and other. Now you got two again. Yeah, not two.
Thank you.
Okay, let's have a look then. So what's our takeaway? I want you to realize that it's really possible to develop a steadiness of mind in seeing others' happiness or suffering. This is what we can do, and we should try to do that. By seeing that all beings equally wish to experience happiness, they equally wish to avoid suffering. And this thing when others experience happiness or suffering and go, that is because of their karma. So all beings, their happiness or their suffering is dependent upon their karma. That's right across the board, it's equal. Or the relationship of their workings with karma. And we all have meditation skills to develop equanimity ourselves. Jeffrey? Yeah.
In the Christian tradition, of course, it's stated, as you sow, so shall you reap. As you do unto others, it will be done unto you. Now, that seems like a nice working paradigm for a person who doesn't want suffering themselves to not impose suffering on others. But I'm finding that a lot of people don't seem to cognize that simple principle. It's like if you didn't, if you don't want, if you don't want suffering, then why impose it on others? So it doesn't seem like they don't want suffering.
Actually, and Jeffrey, that you pointed it out, but so why do we do this when it's so intuitive? Because we don't have impartiality, because we've sorted people out to the ones that matter to me and the ones that don't.
Okay, so next week we're going to have a look at equanimity again from the great scope point of view, but this time through the practice of equalizing self with others. So here there's a lovely technique to develop that type of equality, and this type of equality is, like I said, is different than the equality we've been talking about today. So let's dedicate our willingness to listen to this presentation and to think about it and to talk about it, and hopefully to actually develop it. So due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, not yet born, arise and grow, and may that born have no decline but increase forevermore. As long as space endures, as long as sentient beings abide, may I too remain to dispel the sorrows of the world. So, thank you for all your insightful questions, Jeffrey, and what you had to offer. And for anybody else who's been listening and thinking about this, thank you very much. Try and try to become familiar with this idea of equanimity. It's a very good one, and it is based in reality. You know? It's not something you can just make up and hope it works. It has worked before, it'll work again. So I'll say, fare you well, stay alive, and do the best you can with your lives. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.